Okay, so the objective here for this block out section in the fabrication of custom trays is to create ample relief. So by the time we finish this custom tray passively fits on the model and passively comes off the model. There's two ways of fabricating custom trays. One is just to relieve the visible undercuts, and two is to relieve the undercuts by providing a wax spacer. And we'll get to the wax spacer and the non-wax spacer and how that relates to the clinic when we're talking about tissue stops for final impressions. So the first method I'm going to show you is the method without a wax spacer. I'll do the lower with a wax spacer, and I'll do the upper without the wax spacer. Either way, you still have to block it out before the spacer or not, okay? So I'm gonna use my number 7 spatula, and I'm going to apply wax at least where I see any visible undercuts. Where would they be? Mostly on the upper. You have undercuts in the labial vestibule here, especially around the canine eminence area. Certainly there's some here. So when you turn your model at a certain angle, you can almost see that certain things are not showing up. So that's where you need to block it out. Possibly around the tuberosities here sometimes, and around here. Relieve any deep parts of the palate, any irregular surfaces of the palate, over the insides of the papilla so we don't create a pressure point. Certainly over rugae. And if this was a lot of mobile tissue, I'd be adding extra relief. Possibly using a wax spacer to create even more relief, because this creates just minimal relief. So I'm gonna start blocking out. It really doesn't matter where you start. I tend to, out of habit over the years, I start on the upper right side and make my way across, because it's kind of conducive to the position of the way I hold my spatula anyways. Now, this is a fairly clean surface, and I'll try to keep it fairly clean without having wax spilling all over it, and that's just a matter of controlling your wax. I like to use a number 7 spatula. You might see somebody use a font stock, this instrument. I find this one, it's fine, you can use it, but it picks up a lot of wax, so I don't have the control that I like to see. So, but you can certainly try both and see which one works for you. So I'm going to pick up a little bit of wax. And again, I'm holding the model in a sense that gravity is working with me, not against me. So this would be a leveled, but now I've rotated it so much, the actual area that I'm applying wax to, that's the part of the model that's actually level with the bench. Do you remember I told you guys in the other video that make sure you outline the extension of the tray with a heavy pencil outline, right? Because now we're putting so much wax on it, it's very difficult to see through it. And after we're done with this, we are actually going to put another piece of material on top of this and cut to that line. And if that line is not heavy enough, you won't be able to see it through the other material as well as the wax to cut it accurately. So even though you can't see it, once again, I'm going to pick up some wax, heat the wax over the flame, and apply. And as I'm doing so, I'm rotating my model accordingly so the wax is controlled and everything is nice and clean. I like to add a little more wax than I need. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to take the tip of a number 7 spatula, heat that up a little bit, and go back and gently carve the excess. Notice my wax did not stop at the outline. It went past the outline. I'm going to take the back of my number 7 spatula and carve off the excess wax. So right there, I did what we call a block out of the undercuts. We're going to be using these undercuts for the final prosthesis, but we don't need them now. We need to block them out in order for the custom trays to be able to retrieve them off the model number 1 so we can trim them and fit them back on. So I'll continue on the other side, just a little more real time now. So I'll work on a little section. I won't go too far with this. I'll turn my spatula over to the tip and go back. While the wax is still relatively warm, go back and carve it. Otherwise, if you wait till the end to do this, the wax is going to be very hard as it cools down, and it makes it really uncomfortable to carve it. And just for good measure, I'm going to put a little bit of wax around the tuberosity here. I think, to me at least, it looks like there's a bit of an undercut there, so I'm going to block it out. If you're not sure, block it out. And I'll carve this back just a little bit. And now I'll move to the palette. So I'm going to add some wax in the palette, certainly to block out the rugae. Maybe any pits and fissures that you might have in here that might wedge the custom tray up against the sides of the models. Like I mentioned before, if you're not sure, add a little more wax than you think. You can always compensate for that during your final impression. The issues are evident because people don't relieve enough with their custom trays. There's inadequate relief under the custom tray to provide that space that's needed for the final impression material. A little bit around the tuberosity here. I see a bit of a notch here, so I'm going to block that out. And a little bit on the other side. So this is my initial application of the block out wax when we don't use a wax spacer. Before I go any further, what I'm going to do next is get my alcohol torch and smooth out the wax that I just applied. So you're kind of letting the wax run a little bit on the model surface, and it smooths it out. And the final step is to apply a thin layer of wax, overall thin layer on top of everything. Okay? So for that, I'm going to use the fond stock. Unlike the number 7 spatula, I'm going to use the fond stock, which is considerably bigger, so I can pick up some more wax and speed things along. How much wax do we want to add? Maybe about 1/2 millimeter. Over the whole thing. Whether you blocked it out or not, you're going to go over the bare model surface as well as your block out too. Now sometimes the wax has a tendency to drip and run, so heat up your instrument. No wax on my instrument now. I'm just heating it up and letting the wax level out a little bit. So I started on the palette. I'm going to make my way up to the crest of the ridge. Cover it. And now make my way over to the buckle and labial extensions. It is very important that we create ample relief of any visible undercuts. And I think by adding another 1/2 millimeter of wax on top of it, if you're not using a wax spacer, which we're going to use for the lower to show you the difference, is very important. So I'm going to try to level out this wax as much as I can with my fond stock before I use my alcohol torch again to finally level things out, make them nice and smooth, so it gives us a nice, smooth, even surface underside of the tray. I'm going to put a little bit more here to make sure that we don't impinge the ridge. And if you do things properly, by the time you fabricate your custom tray and you're trying it on and off, it should be a very passive fit. The custom tray should be able to drop off the model while holding it upside down with no resistance. The custom tray should not be wedging up against the cast if you provide adequate relief. I think I'm close. Maybe I can go back with my number 7 spatula. And even things out a little bit further. And finally, I'm going to round things off by gently applying some heat with my alcohol torch and make everything nice and smooth. Notice I'm rotating my model because I know the wax will want to flow, but because I'm turning my model, I'm using gravity to my advantage and creating a nice consistent finish. So that would be the block out for the maxillary cast if you're not using a wax spacer. If we are going to use a wax spacer on the lower, so we're going to treat it just slightly different, not that much different, but slightly different.